Question 42 of Summa Theologica Prima Secundae, Treatise on the Passions. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Summa Theologica Prima Secundae, Treatise on the Passions, by St. Thomas Aquinas, translated by the Fathers of the English Dominican Province. Question 42 of the object of fear, in 6 articles. We must now consider the object of fear, under which head there are 6 points of inquiry. First, whether good or evil is the object of fear. Second, whether evil of nature is the object of fear. Third, whether the evil of sin is an object of fear. Fourth, whether fear itself can be feared. Fifth, whether sudden things are especially feared. Sixth, whether those things are more feared against which there is no remedy. First article, whether the object of fear is good or evil. Objection 1. It would seem that good is the object of fear. For Augustine says in his 83 Questions, question 83, that "we fear nothing save to lose what we love and possess, or not to obtain that which we hope for." But that which we love is good. Therefore fear regards good as its proper object. Obj. 2: Further, the Philosopher says in Rhet. ii, 5 that "power and to be above another is a thing to be feared." But this is a good thing. Therefore good is the object of fear. Obj. 3: Further, there can be no evil in God. But we are commanded to fear God, according to Psalm 33:10, "Fear the Lord, all ye saints." Therefore even the good is an object of fear. On the contrary, Damascene says in De Fide Orth. ii, 12 that fear is of future evil. I answer that, fear is a movement of the appetitive power. Now it belongs to the appetitive power to pursue and to avoid, as stated in Ethic. vi, 2. And pursuit is of good, while avoidance is of evil. Consequently, whatever movement of the appetitive power implies pursuit, has some good for its object, and whatever movement implies avoidance, has an evil for its object. Wherefore, since fear implies an avoidance, in the first place and of its very nature, it regards evil as its proper object. It can, however, regard good also, in so far as referable to evil. This can be in 2 ways. In one way, inasmuch as an evil causes privation of good. Now a thing is evil from the very fact that it is a privation of some good. Wherefore, since evil is shunned because it is evil, it follows that it is shunned because it deprives one of the good that one pursues through love thereof. And in this sense Augustine says that there is no cause for fear save loss of the good we love. In another way, good stands related to evil as its cause, in so far as some good can by its power bring harm to the good we love. And so, just as hope, as stated above in question 40, A. 7, regards 2 things, namely the good to which it tends, and the thing through which there is a hope of obtaining the desired good, so also does fear regard 2 things, namely the evil from which it shrinks, and that good which, by its power, can inflict that evil. In this way God is feared by man, inasmuch as he can inflict punishment, spiritual or corporal. In this way too we fear the power of man, especially when it has been thwarted, or when it is unjust, because then it is more likely to do us harm. In like manner one fears to be over another, that is, to lean on another, so that it is in his power to do us a harm. Thus a man fears another who knows him to be guilty of a crime, lest he reveal it to others. This suffices for the replies to the questions. Second article: whether evil of nature is an object of fear. Objection 1: It would seem that evil of nature is not an object of fear. For the Philosopher says (Rhet. ii, 5) that "fear makes us take counsel." But we do not take counsel about things which happen naturally, as stated in Ethic. iii, 3. Therefore evil of nature is not an object of fear. Obj. 2: Further, natural defects, such as death and the like, are always threatening man. If therefore such like evils were an object of fear, man would needs be always in fear. Obj. 3: Further, nature does not move to contraries. But evil of nature is an effect of nature. Therefore if a man shrinks from such like evils through fear thereof, this is not an effect of nature. Therefore natural fear is not of the evil of nature, and yet it seems that it should be. On the contrary, the Philosopher says (Ethic. iii, 6) that "the most terrible of all things is death," which is an evil of nature. I answer that, as the Philosopher says (Rhet. ii, 5), fear is caused by the "imagination of a future evil, which is either corruptive or painful." Now just as a painful evil is that which is contrary to the will, so a corruptive evil is that which is contrary to nature, and this is the evil of nature. Consequently evil of nature can be the object of fear. But it must be observed that evil of nature sometimes arises from a natural cause, and then it is called an evil of nature, not merely from being a privation of the good of nature, but also from being an effect of nature. Such are natural death and other like defects. But sometimes evil of nature arises from a non-natural cause, such as violent death inflicted by an assailant. In either case evil of nature is feared to a certain extent, and to a certain extent not. For since fear arises "from the imagination of future evil," as the Philosopher says (Rhet. ii, 5), whatever removes the imagination of the future evil, removes fear also. Now it may happen in two ways that an evil may not appear as about to be. First, through being remote and far off, for, on account of the distance, such a thing is considered as though it were not to be. Hence we either do not fear it, or fear it but little. For, as the Philosopher says (Rhet. ii, 5), "we do not fear things that are very far off, since all know that they shall die, but as death is not near, they heed it not." Secondly, a future evil is considered as though it were not to be, on account of its being inevitable, wherefore we look upon it as already present. Hence the Philosopher says (Rhet. ii, 5) that "those who are already on the scaffold are not afraid, seeing that they are on the very point of death from which there is no escape. But in order that a man be afraid, there must be some hope of escape for him." Consequently evil of nature is not feared if it not be apprehended as future. But if evil of nature, that is corruptive, be apprehended as near at hand, and yet with some hope of escape, then it will be feared. Reply Obj. 1: The evil of nature sometimes is not an effect of nature, as stated above. But in so far as it is an effect of nature, although it may be impossible to avoid it entirely, yet it may be possible to delay it, and with this hope one may take counsel about avoiding it. Reply Obj. 2: Although evil of nature ever threatens, yet it does not always threaten from near at hand, and consequently it is not always feared. Reply Obj. 3: Death and other defects of nature are the effects of the common nature, and yet the individual nature rebels against them as far as it can. Accordingly, from the inclination of the individual nature arise pain and sorrow for such like evils, when present; fear, when threatening in the future. Third article: Whether the evil of sin is an object of fear? Objection 1: It would seem that the evil of sin can be an object of fear. For Augustine says on the canonical epistle of John, Tract 9, that "by chaste fear man fears to be severed from God." Now nothing but sin severs us from God, according to Isa. 59:2: "Your iniquities have divided between you and your God." Therefore the evil of sin can be an object of fear. Obj. 2: Further, Cicero says in his Tusculan Questions iv, 6 that "we fear when they are yet to come, those things which give us pain when they are present." But it is possible for one to be pained or sorrowful on account of the evil of sin. Therefore one can also fear the evil of sin. Obj. 3: Further, hope is contrary to fear. But the good of virtue can be the object of hope, as the Philosopher declares in Ethic. ix, 4. And the Apostle says (Gal. 5:10): "I have confidence in you in the Lord, that you will not be of another mind." Therefore fear can regard evil of sin. Obj. 4: Further, shame is a kind of fear, as stated above (Q. 41, A. 4). But shame regards a disgraceful deed, which is an evil of sin. Therefore fear does so likewise. On the contrary, The Philosopher says (Rhet. ii, 5) that "not all evils are feared, for instance, that someone be unjust or slow." I answer that, As stated above (Q. 40, A. 1; Q. 41, A. 2), as the object of hope is a future good difficult but possible to obtain, so the object of fear is a future evil, arduous and not to be easily avoided. From this we may gather that whatever is entirely subject to our power and will is not an object of fear, and that nothing gives rise to fear, save what is due to an external cause. Now human will is the proper cause of the evil of sin; and consequently evil of sin, properly speaking, is not an object of fear. But since the human will may be inclined to sin by some extrinsic cause, if this cause have a strong power of inclination, in that respect a man may fear the evil of sin, in so far as it arises from that extrinsic cause: as when he fears to dwell in the company of wicked men, lest he be led by them to sin. But properly speaking, a man thus disposed fears the being led astray rather than the sin considered in its proper nature, that is, as a voluntary act; for considered in this light it is not an object of fear to him. Reply to Obj. 1: Separation from God is a punishment resulting from sin, and every punishment is, in some way, due to an extrinsic cause. Reply Obj. 2: Sorrow and fear agree in one point, since each regards evil. They differ, however, in 2 points. First, because sorrow is about present evil, whereas fear is future evil. Secondly, because sorrow, being in the concupiscible faculty, regards evil absolutely, wherefore it can be about any evil, great or small, whereas fear, being in the irascible part, regards evil with the addition of a certain arduousness or difficulty, which difficulty ceases in so far as a thing is subject to the will. Consequently, not all things that give us pain when they are present, makes us fear when they are yet to come, but only some things, namely those that are difficult. Reply Obj. 3: Hope is of a good that is obtainable. Now one may obtain a good either of oneself or through another, and so hope may be an act of virtue which lies within our power. On the other hand, fear is of an evil that does not lie in our power, and consequently the evil which is feared is always from an extrinsic cause, while the good that is hoped for may be both from an intrinsic and from an extrinsic cause. Reply Obj. 4: As stated above (Q. 41, A. 4, second and third replies), shame is not fear from the very act of sin, but of the disgrace or ignominy which arises therefrom, and which is due to an extrinsic cause. Fourth article: Whether fear itself can be feared? Objection 1: It would seem that fear cannot be feared. For whatever is feared is prevented from being lost, through fear thereof. Thus a man who fears to lose his health, keeps it, through fearing its loss. If therefore a man be afraid of fear, he will keep himself from fear by being afraid, which seems absurd. Obj. 2: Further, fear is a kind of flight. But nothing flies from itself. Therefore fear cannot be the object of fear. Obj. 3: Further, fear is about the future. But fear is present to him that fears. Therefore it cannot be the object of his fear. On the contrary, a man can love his own love, and can grieve at his own sorrow. Therefore, in like manner, he can fear his own fear. I answer that, as stated above (A. 3), nothing can be an object of fear save what is due to an extrinsic cause, but not that which ensues from our own will. Now fear partly arises from an extrinsic cause, and is partly subject to the will. It is due to an extrinsic cause, in so far as it is a passion resulting from the imagination of an imminent evil. In this sense it is possible for fear to be the object of fear, that is, a man may fear lest he should be threatened by the necessity of fearing, through being assailed by some great evil. It is subject to the will, in so far as the lower appetite obeys reason, wherefore man is able to drive fear away. In this sense fear cannot be the object of fear, as Augustine says in his 83 Questions, question 33. Lest, however, anyone make use of his arguments, in order to prove that fear cannot be at all the object of fear, we must add a solution to the same. Reply Obj. 1: Not every fear is identically the same. There are various fears according to the various objects of fear. Nothing then prevents a man from keeping himself from fearing one thing, by fearing another, so that the fear which he has preserves him from the fear which he has not. Reply Obj. 2: Since fear of an imminent evil is not identical with the fear of imminent evil, it does not follow that a thing flies from itself, or that it is the same flight in both cases. Reply Obj. 3: On account of the various kinds of fear already alluded to, e.g. in the Second Reply, a man's present fear may have a future fear for its object. _Fifth article. Whether sudden things are especially feared? Objection 1: It would seem that unwonted and sudden things are not especially feared. Because, as hope is about good things, so fear is about evil things. But experience conduces to the increase of hope in good things. Therefore it also adds to fear in evil things. Obj. 2: Further, the Philosopher says (Rhet. ii, 5) that "those are feared most who are not quick-tempered, but who are gentle and cunning." Now it is clear that those who are quick-tempered are more subject to sudden emotions. Therefore sudden things are less to be feared. Obj. 3: Further, we think less about things that happen suddenly. But the more we think about a thing, the more we fear it. Hence the Philosopher says (Ethic. iii, 8) that "some appear to be courageous through ignorance, but as soon as they discover that the case is different from what they expected, they run away." Therefore sudden things are feared less. On the contrary, Augustine says (Confess. ii, 6): "Fear is startled at things unwonted and sudden, which endanger things beloved, and takes forethought for their safety." I answer that, As stated above (A. 3, as well as Q. 41, A. 2), the object of fear is an imminent evil, which can be repelled but with difficulty. Now this is due to one of two causes: to the greatness of the evil, or to the weakness of him that fears; while unwontedness and suddenness conduce to both of these causes. First, it helps an imminent evil to seem greater: because all material things, whether good or evil, the more we consider them, the smaller they seem. Consequently, just as sorrow for a present evil is mitigated in course of time, as Cicero states (Tusculan Disputations iii, 30), so too fear of a future evil is diminished by thinking about it beforehand. Secondly, unwontedness and suddenness increase the weakness of him that fears, in so far as they deprive him of the remedies with which he might otherwise provide himself to forestall the coming evil, were it not for the evil taking him by surprise. Reply Obj. 1: The object of hope is a good that is possible to obtain. Consequently whatever increases a man's power, is of a nature to increase hope, and for the same reason to diminish fear, since fear is about an evil which cannot be easily repelled. Since therefore experience increases a man's power of action, therefore, as it increases hope, so does it diminish fear. Reply Obj. 2: Those who are quick-tempered do not hide their anger: wherefore the harm they do others is not so sudden as not to be foreseen. On the other hand, those who are gentle or cunning hide their anger, wherefrom the harm which may be impending from them cannot be foreseen, but takes one by surprise. For this reason the Philosopher says that such men are feared more than others. Reply Obj. 3: Bodily good or evil considered in itself seems greater at first. The reason for this is that a thing is more obvious when seen in juxtaposition with its contrary. Hence when a man passes unexpectedly from penury to wealth, he thinks more of his wealth on account of his previous poverty; while, on the other hand, the rich man who suddenly becomes poor finds poverty all the more disagreeable. For this reason sudden evil is feared more, because it seems more to be evil. However, it may happen through some accident that the greatness of some evil is hidden, for instance if the foe hides himself in ambush; and then it is true that evil inspires greater fear through being much thought about. _Sixth article. Whether those things are more feared for which there is no remedy? Objection 1: It would seem that those things are not more to be feared for which there is no remedy. Because it is a condition of fear that there be some hope of safety, as stated above (A. 2). But an evil that cannot be remedied leaves no hope of escape. Therefore such things are not feared at all. Obj. 2: Further, there is no remedy for the evil of death, since in the natural course of things there is no return from death to life. And yet death is not the most feared of all things, as the Philosopher says (Rhet. ii, 5). Therefore those things are not feared most for which there is no remedy. Obj. 3: Further, the Philosopher says (Ethic. i, 6) that "a thing which lasts long is no better than that which lasts but one day, nor is that which lasts for ever any better than that which is not everlasting." And the same applies to evil. But things that cannot be remedied seem to differ from other things, merely in the point of their lasting long or for ever. Consequently they are not therefore any worse or more to be feared. On the contrary, the Philosopher says (Rhet. ii, 5) that "those things are most to be feared, which when done wrong cannot be put aright; or for which there is no help, or which are not easy." I answer that, The object of fear is evil. Consequently whatever tends to increase evil conduces to the increase of fear. Now evil is increased not only in its species of evil, but also in respect of circumstances, as stated above (Q. 18, A. 3). And of all the circumstances, long-lastingness or even everlastingness seems to have the greatest bearing on the increase of evil. Because things that exist in time are measured, in a way, according to the duration of time. Wherefore if it be an evil to suffer something for a certain length of time, we should reckon the evil doubled if it be suffered for twice that length of time. And accordingly to suffer the same thing for an infinite length of time, i.e. for ever, implies, so to speak, an infinite increase. Now those evils which, after they have come, cannot be remedied at all, or at least not easily, are considered as lasting for ever or for a long time, for which reason they inspire the greatest fear. Reply Obj. 1: Remedy for an evil is twofold. One, by which a future evil is warded off from coming. If such a remedy be removed, there is an end to hope and consequently to fear. Wherefore we do not speak now of remedies of that kind. The other remedy is one by which an already present evil is removed, and of such a remedy we speak now. Reply Obj. 2: Although death be an evil without remedy, yet, since it threatens not from near, it is not feared, as stated above (A. 2). Reply Obj. 3: The Philosopher is speaking there of things that are good in themselves, that is, good specifically. And such like good is no better for lasting long or for ever; its goodness depends on its very nature. End of question 42. Read by Michael Shane Craig Lambert, LC. Question 43 of Summa Theologica Prima Secundae, Treatise on the Passions. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Summa Theologica Prima Secundae, Treatise on the Passions, by St. Thomas Aquinas, translated by the Fathers of the English Dominican Province. Question 43 of the cause of fear, in 2 articles. We must now consider the cause of fear, under which head there are 2 points of inquiry. First, whether love is the cause of fear. Second, whether defect is the cause of fear. First article, whether love is the cause of fear. Objection 1. It would seem that love is not the cause of fear. For that which leads to a thing is its cause. But "fear leads to the love of charity," as Augustine says on the canonical epistle of John, Tract 9. Therefore fear is the cause of love, and not conversely. Obj. 2: Further, the Philosopher says (Rhet. ii, 5) that "those are feared most from whom we dread the advent of some evil." But the dread of evil being caused by someone makes us hate rather than love him. Therefore fear is caused by hate rather than by love. Obj. 3: Further, it has been stated above (Q. 42, A. 3) that those things which occur by our own doing are not fearful. But that which we do from love is done from our inmost heart. Therefore fear is not caused by love. On the contrary, Augustine says in his 83 Questions, question 33, "There can be no doubt that there is no cause for fear, save the loss of what we love, when we possess it, or the failure to obtain what we hope for." Therefore all fear is caused by our loving something, and consequently love is the cause of fear. I answer that, the objects of the soul's passions stand in relation thereto as the forms to the things natural or artificial. Because the passions of the soul take their species from their objects, as the aforesaid things do from their forms. Therefore, just as whatever is a cause of the form is a cause of the thing constituted by that form, so whatever is a cause, in any way whatever, of the object is a cause of the passion. Now a thing may be a cause of the object either by way of efficient cause or by way of material disposition. Thus the object of pleasure is good apprehended as suitable and conjoined, and its efficient cause is that which causes the conjunction, or the suitableness, or goodness, or apprehension of that good thing; while its cause by way of material disposition is a habit or any sort of disposition by reason of which this conjoined good becomes suitable or is apprehended as such. Accordingly, as to the matter in question, the object of fear is something reckoned as an evil to come, near at hand, and difficult to avoid. Therefore that which can inflict such an evil is the efficient cause of the object of fear, and consequently of fear itself; while that which renders a man so disposed that that thing is such an evil to him is a cause of fear and of its object, by way of material disposition. And thus it is that love causes fear, since it is through his loving a certain good, that whatever deprives a man of that good is an evil to him, and that consequently he fears it as an evil. Reply Obj. 1: As stated above (Q. 42, A. 1), fear, of itself and in the first place, regards the evil from which it recoils as being contrary to some loved good. And thus fear, of itself, is born of love. But in the second place it regards the cause from which that evil ensues, so that sometimes, accidentally, fear gives rise to love, in so far as, for instance, through fear of God's punishments, man keeps His commandments, and thus begins to hope, while hope leads to love, as stated above (Q. 40, A. 7). Reply Obj. 2: He, from whom evil is expected, is indeed hated at first, but afterwards, when once we begin to hope for good from him, we begin to love him. But the good, the contrary evil of which is feared, was loved from the beginning. Reply Obj. 3: This argument is true of that which is the efficient cause of the evil to be feared, whereas love causes fear by way of material disposition, as stated above. Second article: Whether defect is the cause of fear? Objection 1: It would seem that defect is not a cause of fear. Because those who are in power are very much feared. But defect is contrary to power. Therefore defect is not a cause of fear. Obj. 2: Further, the defect of those who are already being executed is extreme. But such like do not fear, as stated in Rhet. ii, 5. Therefore defect is not a cause of fear. Obj. 3: Further, contests arise from strength, not from defect. But "those who contend fear those who contend with them," according to Rhet. ii, 5. Therefore defect is not a cause of fear. On the contrary, contraries ensue from contrary causes. But wealth, strength, a multitude of friends, and power drive fear away, according to Rhet. ii, 5. Therefore fear is caused by lack of these. I answer that, as stated above (A. 1), fear may be set down to a twofold cause. One is by way of a material disposition on the part of him that fears; the other is by way of efficient cause, on the part of the person feared. As to the first, then, some defect is, of itself, the cause of fear, for it is owing to some lack of power that one is unable easily to repulse a threatening evil. And yet, in order to cause fear, this defect must be according to a measure. For the defect which causes fear of a future evil is less than the defect caused by evil present, which is the object of sorrow. And still greater would be the defect, if perception of the evil, or love of the good whose contrary is feared, were entirely absent. But as to the second, power and strength are, of themselves, the cause of fear, because it is owing to the fact that the cause apprehended as harmful is powerful, that its effect cannot be repulsed. It may happen, however, in this respect, that some defect causes fear accidentally, in so far as owing to some defect someone wishes to hurt another; for instance, by reason of injustice, either because that other has already done him a harm, or because he fears to be harmed by him. Reply to Obj. 1: This argument is true of the cause of fear on the part of the efficient cause. Reply to Obj. 2: Those who are already being executed are actually suffering from a present evil, wherefore their defect exceeds the measure of fear. Reply to Obj. 3: Those who contend with one another are afraid, not on account of the power which enables them to contend, but on account of the lack of power, owing to which they are not confident of victory. End of question 43. Read by Michael Shane Craig Lambert, LC. Question 44 of Summa Theologica Prima Secundae, Treatise on the Passions. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Summa Theologica Prima Secundae, Treatise on the Passions, by St. Thomas Aquinas, translated by the Fathers of the English Dominican Province. Question 44 of the effects of fear in 4 articles. We must now consider the effects of fear, under which head there are 4 points of inquiry. First, whether fear causes contraction. Second, whether it makes men suitable for counsel. Third, whether it makes one tremble. Fourth, whether it hinders action. First article, whether fear causes contraction. Objection 1: It would seem that fear does not cause contraction. For when contraction takes place, the heat and vital spirits are withdrawn inwardly. But accumulation of heat and vital spirits in the interior parts of the body dilates the heart unto endeavors of daring, as may be seen in those who are angered; while the contrary happens in those who are afraid. Therefore fear does not cause contraction. Obj. 2: Further, when, as a result of contraction, the vital spirits and heat are accumulated in the interior parts, man cries out, as may be seen in those who are in pain. But those who fear utter nothing; on the contrary, they lose their speech. Therefore fear does not cause contraction. Obj. 3: Further, shame is a kind of fear, as stated above (Q. 41, A. 4). But "those who are ashamed blush," as Cicero (Tusculan Disput. iv, 8) and the Philosopher (Ethic. iv, 9) observe. But blushing is an indication, not of contraction, but of the reverse. Therefore contraction is not an effect of fear. On the contrary, Damascene says (De Fide Orth. ii, 23) that "fear is a power according to systole," i.e. contraction. I answer that, As stated above (Q. 28, A. 5), in the passions of the soul, the formal element is the movement of the appetitive power, while the bodily transmutation is the material element. Both of these are mutually proportionate. And consequently the bodily transmutation assumes a resemblance to, and the very nature of, the appetitive movement. Now, as to the appetitive movement of the soul, fear implies a certain contraction, the reason of which is that fear arises from the imagination of some threatening evil which is difficult to repel, as stated above (Q. 41, A. 2). But that a thing be difficult to repel is due to lack of power, as stated above (Q. 43, A. 2. And the weaker a power is, the fewer the things to which it extends. Wherefore from the very imagination that causes fear, there ensues a certain contraction in the appetite. Thus we observe in one who is dying that nature withdraws inwardly, on account of the lack of power. And again we see the inhabitants of a city, when seized with fear, leave the outskirts, and, as far as possible, make for the inner quarters. It is in resemblance to this contraction, which pertains to the appetite of the soul, that in fear a similar contraction of heat and vital spirits towards the inner parts takes place in regard to the body. Reply Obj. 1: As the Philosopher says (De Problem. xxvii, 3), although in those who fear the vital spirits recede from outer to the inner parts of the body, yet the movement of vital spirits is not the same in those who are angry and those who are afraid. For in those who are angry, by reason of the heat and subtlety of the vital spirits, which result from the craving for vengeance, the inward movement has an upward direction, wherefore the vital spirits and heat concentrate around the heart, the result being that an angry man is quick and brave in attacking. But in those who are afraid, on account of the condensation caused by cold, the vital spirits have a downward movement, the said cold being due to the imagined lack of power. Consequently, the heat and vital spirits abandon the heart instead of concentrating around it, the result being that a man who is afraid is not quick to attack, but is more inclined to run away. Reply Obj. 2: To everyone that is in pain, whether man or animal, it is natural to use all possible means of repelling the harmful thing that causes pain but its presence. Thus we observe that animals, when in pain, attack with their jaws or with their horns. Now the greatest help for all purposes, in animals, is heat and vital spirits: wherefore when they are in pain, their nature stores up the heat and vital spirits within them, in order to make use thereof in repelling the harmful object. Hence the Philosopher says (De Problem. xxvii, 9), when the vital spirits and heat are concentrated together within, they require to find a vent in the voice, for which reason those who are in pain can scarcely refrain from crying aloud. On the other hand, in those who are afraid, the internal heat and vital spirits move from the heart downwards, as stated above in the first reply. Wherefore fear hinders speech, which ensues from the emission of the vital spirits in an upward direction through the mouth, the result being that fear makes its subject speechless. For this reason too, fear "makes its subject tremble," as the Philosopher says (De Problem. xxvii, 1, 6, 7. Reply Obj. 3: Mortal perils are contrary not only to the appetite of the soul, but also to nature. Consequently, in such like fear, there is contraction not only in the appetite, but also in the corporeal nature. For when an animal is moved by the imagination of death, it experiences a contraction of heat towards the inner parts of the body, as though it were threatened by natural death. Hence it is that "those who are in fear of death turn pale" (Ethic. iv, 9). But the evil that shame fears is contrary, not to nature, but only to the appetite of the soul. Consequently there results a contraction in this appetite, but not in the corporeal nature. In fact, the soul, as though contracted in itself, is free to set the vital spirits and heat in movement, so that they spread to the outward parts of the body, the result being that those who are ashamed blush. _______________________ SECOND ARTICLE [I II, Q. 100, Art. 2] Whether Fear Makes One Suitable for Counsel? Objection 1: It would seem that fear does not make one suitable for counsel. For the same thing cannot be conducive to counsel and a hindrance thereto. But fear hinders counsel, because every passion disturbs repose, which is requisite for the good use of reason. Therefore fear does not make a man suitable for counsel. Obj. 2: Further, counsel is an act of reason, in thinking and deliberating about the future. But a certain fear "drives away all thought and dislocates the mind," as Cicero observes (De Tusc. Disp. iv, 8). Therefore fear does not conduce to counsel, but hinders it. Obj. 3: Further, just as we have recourse to counsel in order to avoid evil, so do we in order to attain good things. But whereas fear is of evil to be avoided, so is hope of good things to be obtained. Therefore fear is not more conducive to counsel than hope is. On the contrary, the Philosopher says (Rhet. ii, 5) that "fear makes men of counsel." I answer that, A man of counsel may be taken in two ways. First, from his being willing or anxious to take counsel: and thus fear makes men of counsel. Because, as the Philosopher says (Ethic. iii, 3), "we take counsel on great matters, because therein we distrust ourselves." Now things which make us afraid are not simply evil, but have a certain magnitude, both because they seem difficult to repel, and because they are apprehended as near to us, as stated above (Q. 42, A. 2). Wherefore men seek for counsel especially when they are afraid. Secondly, a man of counsel means one who is apt for giving good counsel: and in this sense neither fear nor any passion makes men of counsel. Because when a man is affected by a passion, things seem to him greater or smaller than they really are. Thus to a lover, what he loves seems better; to him that fears, what he fears seems more dreadful. Consequently, owing to the want of right judgment, every passion, considered in itself, hinders the faculty of giving good counsel. This suffices for the reply to the first objection. Reply Obj. 2: The stronger a passion is, the greater the hindrance is it to the man who is swayed by it. Consequently, when fear is intense, man does indeed wish to take counsel, but his thoughts are so disturbed that he can find no counsel. If, however, the fear be slight, so as to make a man wish to take counsel, without gravely disturbing the reason, it may even make it easier for him to take good counsel, by reason of his ensuing carefulness. Reply Obj. 3: Hope also makes man a good counsellor, because, as the Philosopher says (Rhet. ii, 5), "no man takes counsel in matters he despairs of"; nor about impossible things, as he says (Ethic. iii, 3). But fear incites to counsel more than hope does: because hope is of good things, as being possible of attainment, whereas fear is of evil things, as being difficult to repel, so that fear regards the aspect of difficulty more than hope does. And it is in matters of difficulty, especially when we distrust ourselves, that we take counsel, as stated above. Third article [I II, Q. 100, Art. 3] Whether Fear Makes One Tremble? Objection 1: It would seem that trembling is not an effect of fear. Because trembling is occasioned by cold. Thus we observe that a cold person trembles. Now fear does not seem to make one cold, but rather to cause a parching heat, a sign whereof is that those who fear are thirsty, especially if their fear be very great, as in the case of those who are being led to execution. Therefore fear does not cause trembling. Obj. 2: Further, fecal evacuation is occasioned by heat. Hence laxative medicines are generally warm. But these evacuations are often caused by fear. Therefore fear apparently causes heat, and consequently does not cause trembling. Obj. 3: Further, in fear heat is withdrawn from the outer to the inner parts of the body. If therefore man trembles in his outward parts, through the heat being withdrawn thus, it seems that fear should cause this trembling in all the external members. But such is not the case. Therefore trembling of the body is not caused by fear. On the contrary, Cicero says in his Tusculan Disputations iv, 8 that "fear is followed by trembling, pallor, and chattering of the teeth." I answer that, as stated above (A. 1), in fear there takes place a certain contraction from the outward to the inner parts of the body, the result being that the outer parts become cold, and for this reason trembling is occasioned in these parts, being caused by a lack of power in controlling the members; which lack of power is due to the want of heat, which is the instrument whereby the soul moves those members, as stated in De Anima ii, 4. Reply Obj. 1: When the heat withdraws from the outer to the inner parts, the inward heat increases, especially in the inferior or nutritive parts. Consequently, the humid element being spent, thirst ensues. Sometimes indeed the result is a loosening of the bowels, and urinary or even seminal evacuation. Or else such like evacuations are due to contraction of the abdomen and testicles, as the Philosopher says (De Problem. xxii, 11). This suffices for the reply to the second objection. Reply Obj. 3: In fear heat abandons the heart, with a downward movement. Hence in those who are afraid, the heart especially trembles, as also those members which are connected with the breast where the heart resides. Hence those who fear tremble especially in their speech, on account of the tracheal artery being near the heart. The lower lip, too, and the lower jaw tremble, through their connection with the heart, which explains the chattering of teeth. For the same reason the arms and hands tremble, or else because the aforesaid members are more mobile. For which reason the knees tremble in those who are afraid, according to Isa. 35:3: "Strengthen ye the feeble hands, and confirm the trembling knees." _______________________ FOURTH ARTICLE [I II, Q. 100, Art. 4] Whether Fear Hinders Action? Objection 1: It would seem that fear hinders action. For action is hindered chiefly by a disturbance in the reason, which directs action. But fear disturbs reason, as stated above (A. 2). Therefore fear hinders action. Obj. 2: Further, those who fear while doing anything are more apt to fail. Thus a man who walks on a plank placed aloft easily falls through fear, whereas if he were to walk on the same plank down below, he would not fall, through not being afraid. Therefore fear hinders action. Obj. 3: Further, laziness or sloth is a kind of fear. But laziness hinders action. Therefore fear does too. On the contrary, the Apostle says in Philippians 2:12, "With fear and trembling work out your salvation," and he would not say this if fear were a hindrance to a good work. Therefore fear does not hinder a good action. I answer that, Man's exterior actions are caused by the soul as first mover, but by the bodily members as instruments. Now action may be hindered both by defect of the instrument and by the defect of the principal mover. On the part of the bodily instruments, fear considered in itself is always apt to hinder exterior action, on account of the outward members being deprived through fear of their heat. But on the part of the soul, if the fear be moderate, without much disturbance of the reason, it conduces to working well, in so far as it causes a certain solicitude, and makes a man take counsel and work with greater attention. If, however, fear increases so much as to disturb the reason, it hinders action even on the part of the soul. But of such a fear the Apostle does not speak. This suffices for the reply to the first objection. Reply Obj. 2: He that falls from a plank placed aloft suffers a disturbance of his imagination through fear of the fall that is pictured to his imagination. Reply Obj. 3: Everyone in fear shuns that which he fears, and therefore, since laziness is a fear of work itself as being toilsome, it hinders work by withdrawing the will from it. But fear of other things conduces to action in so far as it inclines the will to do that whereby a man escapes from what he fears. End of question 44. Read by Michael Shane Craig Lambert, LC. Question 45 of Summa Theologica Prima Secundae, Treatise on the Passions. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Summa Theologica Prima Secundae, Treatise on the Passions, by St. Thomas Aquinas, translated by the Fathers of the English Dominican Province. Question 45 of Daring, in 4 articles. We must now consider daring, under which head there are 4 points of inquiry. First, whether daring is contrary to fear. Second, how is daring related to hope? Third, of the cause of daring. Fourth, of its effect. First article: whether daring is contrary to fear. Objection 1: It would seem that daring is not contrary to fear. For Augustine says in his 83 Questions, question 31, that daring is a vice. Now vice is contrary to virtue. Since, therefore, fear is not a virtue but a passion, it seems that daring is not contrary to fear. Objection 2: Further, to one thing there is one contrary. But hope is contrary to fear. Therefore daring is not contrary to fear. Obj. 3: Further, every passion excludes its opposite. But fear excludes safety, for Augustine says (Confess. ii, 6) that "fear takes forethought for safety." Therefore safety is contrary to fear. Therefore daring is not contrary to fear. On the contrary, the Philosopher says (Rhet. ii, 5) that daring is contrary to fear. I answer that, It is of the essence of contraries to be "farthest removed from one another," as stated in Metaph. x, 4. Now that which is farthest removed from fear is daring, since fear turns away from the future hurt on account of its victory over him that fears it, whereas daring turns on threatened danger because of its own victory over that same danger. Consequently, it is evident that daring is contrary to fear. Reply Obj. 1: Anger, daring, and all the names of the passions can be taken in two ways. First, as denoting absolutely movements of the sensitive appetite in respect of some object, good or bad; and thus they are names of passions. Secondly, as denoting besides this movement, a straying from the order of reason; and thus they are names of vices. It is in this sense that Augustine speaks of daring, but we are speaking of it in the first sense. Reply Obj. 2: To one thing, in the same respect, there are not several contraries; but in different respects, nothing prevents one thing having several contraries. Accordingly it has been said above (Q. 23, A. 2; as well as (Q. 40, A. 4) that the irascible passions admit of a twofold contrariety: one, according to the opposition of good and evil, and thus fear is contrary to hope; the other, according to the opposition of approach and withdrawal, and thus daring is contrary to fear, and despair contrary to hope. Reply Obj. 3: Safety does not denote something contrary to fear, but merely the exclusion of fear. For he is said to be safe who fears not. Wherefore safety is opposed to fear as a privation, while daring is opposed thereto as a contrary. And as contrariety implies privation, so daring implies safety. Second article: Whether daring ensues from hope? Objection 1: It would seem that daring does not ensue from hope. Because daring regards evil and fearful things, as stated in Ethic. iii, 7. But hope regards good things, as stated above (Q. 40, A. 1). Therefore they have different objects and are not in the same order. Therefore daring does not ensue from hope. Obj. 2: Further, just as daring is contrary to fear, so is despair contrary to hope. But fear does not ensue from despair; in fact, despair excludes fear, as the Philosopher says (Rhet. ii, 5). Therefore daring does not result from hope. Obj. 3: Further, daring is intent on something good, viz. victory. But it belongs to hope to tend to that which is good and difficult. Therefore daring is the same as hope, and consequently does not result from it. On the contrary, the Philosopher says (Ethic. iii, 8) that "those who are hopeful are full of daring." Therefore it seems that daring ensues from hope. I answer that, as we have often stated (Q. 22, A. 2; Q. 35, A. 1; Q. 41, A. 1), all these passions belong to the appetitive power. Now every movement of the appetitive power is reducible to one either of pursuit or of avoidance. Again, pursuit or avoidance is of something either by reason of itself, or by reason of something else. By reason of itself, good is the object of pursuit, and evil the object of avoidance. But by reason of something else, evil can be the object of pursuit through some good attaching to it, and good can be the object of avoidance through some evil attaching to it. Now that which is by reason of something else follows that which is in reason by itself. Consequently, pursuit of evil follows pursuit of good, and avoidance of good follows avoidance of evil. Now these four things belong to four passions, since pursuit of good belongs to hope, avoidance of evil to fear, the pursuit of the fearful evil belongs to daring, and the avoidance of good to despair. It follows, therefore, that daring results from hope, since it is in hope of overcoming the threatening object of fear that one attacks it boldly. But despair results from fear, since the reason why a man despairs is because he fears the difficulty attaching to the good he should hope for. Reply Obj. 1: This argument would hold if good and evil were not coordinate objects. But because evil has a certain relation to good, since it comes after good, as privation comes after habit, consequently daring which pursues evil comes after hope which pursues good. Reply Obj. 2: Although good, absolutely speaking, is prior to evil, yet avoidance of evil precedes avoidance of good, just as the pursuit of good precedes the pursuit of evil. Consequently, just as hope precedes daring, so fear precedes despair. And just as fear does not always lead to despair, but only when it is intense, so hope does not always lead to daring, save only when it is strong. Reply Obj. 3: Although the object of daring is an evil to which, in the estimation of the daring man, the good of victory is conjoined, yet daring regards the evil, and hope regards the conjoined good. In like manner, despair regards directly the good which it turns away from, while fear regards the conjoined evil. Hence, properly speaking, daring is not a part of hope, but its effect, just as despair is an effect, not a part, of fear. For this reason too, daring cannot be a principal passion. Third article: Whether some defect is a cause of daring. Objection 1: It would seem that some defect is a cause of daring. For the Philosopher says (De Problem. xxvii, 4) that "lovers of wine are strong and daring." But from wine ensues the effect of drunkenness. Therefore daring is caused by a defect. Obj. 2: Further, the Philosopher says (Rhet. ii, 5) that "those who have no experience of danger are bold." But want of experience is a defect. Therefore daring is caused by a defect. Obj. 3: Further, those who have suffered wrongs are wont to be daring, "like the beasts when beaten," as stated in Ethic. iii, 5. But the suffering of wrongs pertains to defect. Therefore daring is caused by a defect. On the contrary, The Philosopher says (Rhet. ii, 5) that the cause of daring is the presence in the imagination of the hope that the means of safety are nigh, and that the things to be feared are either non-existent or far off. But anything pertaining to defect implies either the removal of the means of safety, or the proximity of something to be feared. Therefore nothing pertaining to defect is a cause of daring. I answer that, as stated above (AA. 1 and 2), daring results from hope and is contrary to fear. Wherefore whatever is naturally apt to cause hope or banish fear is a cause of daring. Since, however, fear and hope, and also daring, being passions, consist in a movement of the appetite and in a certain bodily transmutation, a thing may be considered as the cause of daring in two ways: whether by raising hope, or by banishing fear; in one way, in the part of the appetitive movement; in another way, on the part of the bodily transmutation. On the part of the appetitive movement which follows apprehension, hope that leads to daring is roused by those things that make us reckon victory as possible. Such things regard either our own power, as bodily strength, experience of dangers, abundance of wealth, and the like; or they regard the powers of others, such as having a great number of friends, or any other means of help, especially if a man trust in the divine assistance: wherefore "those are more daring, with whom it is well in regard to godlike things," as the Philosopher says (Rhet. ii, 5). Fear is banished, in this way, by the removal of threatening causes of fear: for instance, by the fact that a man has no enemies, through having harmed nobody, so that he is not aware of any imminent danger; since those especially appear to be threatened by danger who have harmed others. On the part of the bodily transmutation, daring is caused through the incitement of hope and the banishment of fear, by those things which raise the temperature about the heart. Wherefore the Philosopher says (De Part. Animal. iii, 4) that "those whose heart is small in size are more daring, while animals whose heart is large are timid, because the natural heat is unable to give the same degree of temperature to a large as to a small heart, just as a fire does not heat a large house as well as it does a small house." He says also (De Problem. xxvii, 4) that "those whose lungs contain much blood are more daring, through the heat in the heart that results therefrom." He says also in the same passage that "lovers of wine are more daring, on account of the heat of the wine." Hence it has been said above (Q. 40, A. 6) that drunkenness conduces to hope, since the heat in the heart banishes fear and raises hope, by reason of the dilatation and enlargement of the heart. Reply Obj. 1: Drunkenness causes daring, not through being a defect, but through dilating the heart, and again through making a man think greatly of himself. Reply Obj. 2: Those who have no experience of dangers are more daring, not on account of a defect, but accidentally, i.e. in so far as through being inexperienced they do not know their own failings, nor the dangers that threaten. Hence it is that the removal of the cause of fear gives rise to daring. Reply Obj. 3: As the Philosopher says (Rhet. ii, 5), "those who have been wronged are courageous, because they think that God comes to the assistance of those who suffer unjustly." Hence it is evident that no defect causes daring except accidentally, i.e. in so far as some excellence attaches thereto, real or imaginary, either in oneself or in another. _______________________ FOURTH ARTICLE [I II, Q. 100, Art. 4] Whether the Brave Are More Eager at First Than in the Midst of Danger? Objection 1: It would seem that the daring are not more eager at first than in the midst of danger. Because trembling is caused by fear, which is contrary to daring, as stated above (A. 1; Q. 44, A. 3). But the daring sometimes tremble at first, as the Philosopher says (De Problem. xxvii, 3). Therefore they are not more eager at first than in the midst of danger. Obj. 2: Further, passion is intensified by an increase in its object. Thus, since a good is lovable, what is better is yet more lovable. But the object of daring is something difficult. Therefore the greater the difficulty, the greater the daring. But danger is more arduous and difficult when present. It is then therefore that daring is greatest. Obj. 3: Further, anger is provoked by the infliction of wounds. But anger causes daring, for the Philosopher says (Rhet. ii, 5) that "anger makes man bold." Therefore when man is in the midst of danger and when he is being beaten, then he is the most daring. On the contrary, It is said in Ethic. iii, 7 that "the daring are precipitate and full of eagerness before the danger, yet in the midst of dangers they stand aloof." I answer that, Daring, being a movement of the sensitive appetite, follows an apprehension of the sensitive faculty. But the sensitive faculty cannot make comparisons, nor can it inquire into circumstances. Its judgment is instantaneous. Now it happens sometimes that it is impossible for a man to take note in an instant of all the difficulties of a certain situation. Hence there arises the movement of daring to face the danger, so that when he comes to experience the danger, he feels the difficulty to be greater than he expected, and so gives way. On the other hand, reason discusses all the difficulties of a situation. Consequently, men of fortitude who face danger according to the judgment of reason, at first seem slack, because they face the danger not from passion but with due deliberation. Yet when they are in the midst of danger, they experience nothing unforeseen, but sometimes the difficulty turns out to be less than they anticipated, wherefore they are more persevering. Moreover, it may be because they face the danger on account of the good of virtue, which is the abiding object of their will, however great the danger may prove. Whereas men of daring face the danger on account of a mere thought giving rise to hope and banishing fear, as stated above (A. 3). Reply Obj. 1: Trembling does occur in men of daring, on account of the heat being withdrawn from the outer to the inner parts of the body, as also occurs in those who are afraid. But in men of daring the heat withdraws to the heart, where in those who are afraid it withdraws to the inferior parts. Reply Obj. 2: The object of love is good simply, wherefore if it be increased, love is increased simply. But the object of daring is a compound of good and evil, and the movement of daring towards evil presupposes the movement of hope towards good. If therefore so much difficulty be added to the danger that it overcomes hope, the movement of daring does not ensue but fails. But if the movement of daring does ensue, the greater the danger, the greater is the daring considered to be. Reply Obj. 3: Hurt does not give rise to anger unless there be some kind of hope, as we shall see later on (Q. 46, A. 1). Consequently, if the danger be so great as to banish all hope of victory, anger does not ensue. It is true, however, that if anger does ensue, there will be greater daring. End of question 45. Read by Michael Shane Craig Lambert, LC. Question 46 of Summa Theologica Prima Secundae, Treatise on the Passions. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Summa Theologica, Prima Secundae, Treatise on the Passions, by St. Thomas Aquinas, translated by the Fathers of the English Dominican Province. Question 46. Of anger, in itself, in 8 articles. We must now consider anger, and 1. Anger in itself, 2. The cause of anger and its remedy, 3. The effect of anger. Under the first head there are 8 points of inquiry. First, whether anger is a special passion. Second, whether the object of anger is good or evil. Third, whether anger is in the concupiscible faculty. Fourth, whether anger is accompanied by an act of reason. Fifth, whether anger is more natural than desire. Sixth, whether anger is more grievous than hatred. Seventh, whether anger is only towards those with whom we have a relation of justice. Eighth, of the species of anger. First article. Whether anger is a special passion. Objection 1. It would seem that anger is not a special passion. For the irascible power takes its name from anger, ira. But there are several passions in this power, not only one. Therefore anger is not one special passion. Objection 2. Further, to every special passion there is a contrary passion, as is evident by going through them one by one. But no passion is contrary to anger, as stated above (Q. 23, A. 3). Therefore anger is not a special passion. Obj. 3. Further, one special passion does not include another. But anger includes several passions, since it accompanies sorrow, pleasure, and hope, as the Philosopher states (Rhet. ii, 2). Therefore anger is not a special passion. On the contrary, Damascene (De Fide Orth. ii, 16) calls anger a special passion. And so does Cicero in the Tusculan Disputations 4:7. I answer that, a thing is said to be general in 2 ways. First, by predication. Thus animal is general in respect of all animals. Secondly, by causality. Thus the Son is the general cause of all things generated here below, according to Dionysius (Div. Nom. iv). Because just as a genus contains potentially many differences, according to a likeness of matter, so an efficient cause contains many effects according to its active power. Now it happens that an effect is produced by the concurrence of various causes. And since every cause remains somewhat in its effect, we may say that, in yet a third way, an effect which is due to the concurrence of several causes has a certain generality, inasmuch as several causes are, in a fashion, actually existing therein. Accordingly, in the first way, anger is not a general passion, but is condivided with other passions, as stated above (Q. 23, A. 4). In like manner neither is it in the second way, since it is not a cause of the other passions. But in this way love may be called a general passion, as Augustine declares (De Civ. Dei xiv, 7, 9), because love is the primary root of all the other passions, as stated above (Q. 27, A. 4). But in a third way anger may be called a general passion, inasmuch as it is caused by a concurrence of several passions. Because the movement of anger does not arise save on account of some pain inflicted, and unless there be desire and hope of revenge. For, as the Philosopher says (Rhet. ii, 2), "the angry man hopes to punish, since he craves for revenge as being possible." Consequently, if the person who inflicted the injury excel very much, anger does not ensue, but only sorrow, as Avicenna states (De Anima iv, 6). Reply Obj. 1: The irascible power takes its name from ira, anger, not because every movement of that power is one of anger, but because all its movements terminate in anger, and because, of all these movements, anger is the most patent. Reply Obj. 2: From the very fact that anger is caused by contrary passions, that is, by hope, which is of good, and by sorrow, which is of evil, it includes in itself contrariety, and consequently it has no contrary outside of itself. Thus also in mixed colors there is no contrariety, except that of the simple colors from which they are made. Reply Obj. 3: Anger includes several passions, not indeed as a genus includes several species, but rather according to the inclusion of cause and effect. Second article [I II, Q. 100, Art. 2] Whether the Object of Anger Is Good or Evil? Objection 1: It would seem that the object of anger is evil. For Gregory of Nyssa says (De Nat. Boni xxi) that anger is "the sword bearer of desire," inasmuch, to wit, as it assails whatever obstacle stands in the way of desire. But an obstacle has the character of evil. Therefore anger regards evil as its object. Obj. 2: Further, anger and hatred agree in their effect, since each seeks to inflict harm on another. But hatred regards evil as its object, as stated above (Q. 29, A. 1). Therefore anger does also. Obj. 3: Further, anger arises from sorrow, wherefore the Philosopher says (Ethic. viii, 6) that "anger acts with sorrow." But evil is the object of sorrow. Therefore it is also the object of anger. On the contrary, Augustine says (Confess. ii, 6) that "anger craves for revenge." But the desire for revenge is a desire for something good, since revenge belongs to justice. Therefore the object of anger is good. Moreover, anger is always accompanied by hope, wherefore it causes pleasure, as the Philosopher says (Rhet. ii, 2). But the object of hope and of pleasure is good. Therefore good is also the object of anger. I answer that, The movement of the appetitive power follows an act of the apprehensive power. Now the apprehensive power apprehends a thing in two ways. First, by way of an incomplex object, as when we understand what a man is. Secondly, by way of a complex object, as when we understand that whiteness is in a man. Consequently, in each of these ways the appetitive power can tend to both good and evil: by way of a simple and incomplex object, when the appetite simply follows and adheres to good, or recoils from evil, And such movements are desire, hope, pleasure, sorrow, and so forth. By way of a complex object, as when the appetite is concerned with some good or evil being in or being done to another, either seeking this or recoiling from it. This is evident in the case of love and hatred. For we love someone, in so far as we wish some good to be in him, and we hate someone, in so far as we wish some evil to be in him. It is the same with anger. For when a man is angry, he wishes to be avenged on someone. Hence the movement of anger has a twofold tendency, notably to vengeance itself, which it desires and hopes for as being a good, wherefore it takes pleasure in it; and to the person on whom it seeks vengeance, as to something contrary and hurtful, which bears the character of evil. We must, however, observe a twofold difference in this respect between anger on the one side and hatred and love on the other. The first difference is that anger always regards two objects, whereas love and hatred sometimes regard but one object, as when a man is said to love wine or something of the kind, or to hate it. The second difference is that both the objects of love are good, since the lover wishes good to someone, as to something agreeable to himself, while both the objects of hatred bear the character of evil, for the man who hates wishes evil to someone, as to something disagreeable to him. Whereas anger regards one object under the aspect of evil, notably the noxious person, on whom it seeks to be avenged. Consequently, it is a passion somewhat made up of contrary passions. This suffices for the replies to the objections. Third article. Whether anger is in the concupiscible faculty? Objection 1. It would seem that anger is in the concupiscible faculty. For Cicero says in the Tusculan Disputations 4:9 that anger is a kind of desire. But desire is in the concupiscible faculty. Therefore anger is too. Objection 2. Further, Augustine says in his Rule that anger grows into hatred. And Cicero says in the Tusculan Disputations 4:9 that hatred is inveterate anger. But hatred, like love, is a concupiscible passion. Therefore anger is in the concupiscible faculty. Obj. 3. Further, Damascene in De Fide Orth. ii, 16, and Gregory of Nyssa in De Natura Humana 21 say that anger is made up of sorrow and desire. Both of these are in the concupiscible faculty. Therefore anger is a concupiscible passion. On the contrary, the concupiscible is distinct from the irascible faculty. If therefore anger were in the concupiscible power, the irascible would not take its name from it. I answer that, as stated above (Q. 23, A. 1), the passions of the irascible part differ from the passions of the concupiscible faculty, in that the objects of the concupiscible passions are good and evil absolutely considered, whereas the objects of the irascible passions are good and evil in a certain elevation or arduousness. Now it has been stated in Article 2 that anger regards two objects, notably the vengeance that it seeks, and the person on whom it seeks vengeance. And in respect of both, anger requires a certain arduousness, For the movement of anger does not arise unless there be some magnitude about both these objects: since "we make no ado about things that are not or very minute," as the Philosopher observes (Rhet. ii, 2). It is therefore evident that anger is not in the concupiscible, but in the irascible faculty. Reply Obj. 1: Cicero gives the name of desire to any kind of craving for a future good, without discriminating between that which is arduous and that which is not. Accordingly he reckons anger as a kind of desire, inasmuch as it is a desire of revenge. In this sense, however, desire is common to the irascible and concupiscible faculties. Reply Obj. 2: Anger is said to grow into hatred, not as though the same passion, which at first was anger, afterwards becomes hatred by becoming inveterate, but by a process of causality: for anger, when it lasts a long time, engenders hatred. Reply Obj. 3: Anger is said to be composed of sorrow and desire, not as though they were its parts, but because they are its causes. And it has been said above (Q. 25, A. 2) that the concupiscible passions are the causes of the irascible passions. _______________________ FOURTH ARTICLE [I II, Q. 100, Art. 4] Whether Anger Requires an Act of Reason? Objection 1: It would seem that anger does not require an act of reason. For, since anger is a passion, it is in the sensitive appetite. But the sensitive appetite follows an apprehension, not of reason, but of the sensitive faculty. Therefore anger does not require an act of reason. Obj. 2: Further, dumb animals are devoid of reason, and yet they are seen to be angry. Therefore anger does not require an act of reason. Obj. 3: Further, drunkenness fetters the reason, whereas it is conducive to anger. Therefore anger does not require an act of reason. On the contrary, the Philosopher says (Ethic. vii, 6) that "anger listens to reason somewhat." I answer that, As stated above (A. 2), anger is a desire for vengeance. Now vengeance implies a comparison between the punishment to be inflicted and the hurt done. Wherefore the Philosopher says (Ethic. vii, 6) that "anger, as if it had drawn the inference that it ought to quarrel with such a person, is therefore immediately exasperated." Now to compare and to draw an inference is an act of reason. Therefore anger, in a fashion, requires an act of reason. Reply Obj. 1: The movement of the appetitive power may follow an act of reason in two ways. In the first way, it follows the reason in so far as the reason commands: and thus the will follows reason, wherefore it is called the rational appetite. In another way, it follows reason in so far as the reason denounces, and thus anger follows reason. For the Philosopher says (De Problem. xxviii, 3) that "anger follows reason not in obedience to reason's command, but as a result of reason's denouncing the injury." Because the sensitive appetite is subject to the reason, not immediately, but through the will. Reply Obj. 2: Dumb animals have a natural instinct imparted to them by the divine reason, in virtue of which they are gifted with movements, both internal and external, like unto rational movements, as stated above (Q. 40, A. 3). Reply Obj. 3: As stated in Ethic. vii, 6, anger listens somewhat to reason, in so far as reason denounces the injury inflicted, but listens not perfectly, because it does not observe the rule of reason as to the measure of vengeance. Anger, therefore, requires an act of reason, and yet proves a hindrance to reason. Wherefore the Philosopher says (De Problem. iii, 2, 27) that those who are very drunk, so as to be incapable of the use of reason, do not get angry, but those who are slightly drunk do get angry, through being still able, though hampered, to form a judgment of reason. _Fifth article. Whether anger is more natural than desire? Objection 1: It would seem that anger is not more natural than desire. Because it is proper to man to be by nature a gentle animal. But "gentleness is contrary to anger," as the Philosopher states in Rhet. ii, 3. Therefore anger is no more natural than desire. In fact, it seems to be altogether unnatural to man. Obj. 2: Further, reason is contrasted with nature, since those things that act according to reason are not said to act according to nature. Now "anger requires an act of reason, but desire does not," as stated in Ethic. vii, 6. Therefore desire is more natural than anger. Obj. 3: Further, anger is a craving for vengeance, while desire is a craving for those things especially which are pleasant to the touch, viz. for pleasures of the table and for sexual pleasures. But these things are more natural to man than vengeance. Therefore desire is more natural than anger. On the contrary, The Philosopher says in Ethic. vii, 6 that "anger is more natural than desire." I answer that, By natural we mean that which is caused by nature, as stated in Phys. ii, 1. Consequently the question as to whether a particular passion is more or less natural cannot be decided without reference to the cause of that passion. Now the cause of a passion, as stated above (Q. 36, A. 2), may be considered in two ways: first, on the part of the object; secondly, on the part of the subject. If then we consider the cause of anger and of desire, on the part of the object, thus desire, especially of pleasures of the table and of sexual pleasures, is more natural than anger, in so far as these pleasures are more natural to man than vengeance. If, however, we consider the cause of anger on the part of the subject, thus anger, in a manner, is more natural, and, in a manner, desire is more natural. Because the nature of an individual man may be considered either as to the generic, or as to the specific nature, or again as to the particular temperament of the individual. If then we consider the generic nature, that is, the nature of this man considered as an animal, thus desire is more natural than anger, because it is from this very generic nature that man is inclined to desire those things which tend to preserve him, the life both of the species and of the individual. If, however, we consider the specific nature, that is, the nature of this man as a rational being, then anger is more natural to man than desire, in so far as anger follows reason more than desire does. Wherefore the Philosopher says (Ethic. iv, 5) that revenge, which pertains to anger, is more natural to man than meekness. For it is natural to everything to rise up against things contrary and hurtful. And if we consider the nature of the individual, in respect of his particular temperament, thus anger is more natural than desire. For the reason that anger is prone to ensue from the natural tendency to anger, more than desire, or any other passion, is to ensue from a natural tendency to desire, which tendencies result from a man's individual temperament. Because disposition to anger is due to a bilious temperament, and of all the humors the bile moves quickest, for it is like fire. Consequently, he that is temperamentally disposed to anger is sooner incensed with anger, than he that is temperamentally disposed to desire is inflamed with desire. And for this reason the Philosopher says (Ethic. vii, 6) that a disposition to anger is more liable to be transmitted from the parent to child than a disposition to desire. Reply Obj. 1: We may consider in man both the natural temperament on the part of the body and the reason. On the part of the bodily temperament, a man, considered specifically, does not naturally excel others either in anger or in any other passion, on account of the moderation of his temperament. But other animals, forasmuch as their temperament recedes from this moderation and approaches to an extreme disposition, are naturally disposed to some excessive passion, such as the lion in daring, the hound in anger, the hare in fear, and so forth. On the part of reason, however, it is natural to man both to be angry and to be gentle, in so far as reason somewhat causes anger, by denouncing the injury which causes anger, and somewhat appeases anger, in so far as the angry man "does not listen perfectly to the command of reason," as stated above (A. 4, ad 3). Reply Obj. 2: Reason itself belongs to the nature of man, wherefore from the very fact that anger requires an act of reason, it follows that it is, in a manner, natural to man. Reply Obj. 3: This argument regards anger and desire on the part of the object. _______________________ SIXTH ARTICLE [I II, Q. 100, Art. 6] Whether Anger Is More Grievous Than Hatred? Objection 1: It would seem that anger is more grievous than hatred. For it is written (Prov. 27:4) that "anger hath no mercy, nor fury when it breaketh forth." But hatred sometimes has mercy. Therefore anger is more grievous than hatred. Obj. 2: Further, it is worse to suffer evil and to grieve for it, than merely to suffer it. But when a man hates, he is contented if the object of his hatred suffer evil: whereas the angry man is not satisfied unless the object of his anger know it and be aggrieved thereby, as the Philosopher says (Rhet. ii, 4). Therefore anger is more grievous than hatred. Obj. 3: Further, a thing seems to be so much the more firm according as more things concur to set it up. Thus a habit is all the more settled through being caused by several acts. But anger is caused by the concurrence of several passions, as stated above (A. 1), whereas hatred is not. Therefore anger is more settled and more grievous than hatred. On the contrary, Augustine, in his Rule, compares hatred to a beam, but anger to a mote. I answer that, the species and nature of a passion are taken from its object. Now the object of anger is the same in substance as the object of hatred, since, just as the hater wishes evil to him whom he hates, so does the angry man wish evil to him with whom he is angry. But there is a difference of aspect. For the hater wishes evil to his enemy as evil, whereas the angry man wishes evil to him with whom he is angry, not as evil, but in so far as it has an aspect of good, that is, in so far as he reckons it as just, since it is a means of vengeance. Wherefore also it has been said above (A. 2) that hatred implies application of evil to evil, whereas anger denotes application of good to evil. Now it is evident that to seek evil under the aspect of justice is a lesser evil than simply to seek evil to someone. Because to wish evil to someone under the aspect of justice may be according to the virtue of justice, if it be in conformity with the order of reason. And anger fails only in this, that it does not obey the precept of reason in taking vengeance. Consequently, it is evident that hatred is far worse and graver than anger. Reply Obj. 1: In anger and hatred, two points may be considered, namely, the thing desired, and the intensity of the desire. As to the thing desired, anger has more mercy than hatred does. For since hatred desires another's evil for evil's sake, it is satisfied with no particular measure of evil, because those things that are desired for their own sake are desired without measure, as the Philosopher states (Polit. i, 3), instancing a miser with regard to riches. Hence it is written (Ecclus. 12:16): "An enemy, if he find an opportunity, will not be satisfied with blood." Anger, on the other hand, seeks evil only under the aspect of a just means of vengeance. Consequently, when the evil inflicted goes beyond the measure of justice according to the estimate of the angry man, then he has mercy. Wherefore the Philosopher says (Rhet. ii, 4) that "the angry man is appeased if many evils befall, whereas the hater is never appeased." As to the intensity of the desire, anger excludes mercy more than hatred does, because the movement of anger is more impetuous through the heating of the bile. Hence the passage quoted continues: "Who can bear the violence of one provoked?" Reply Obj. 2: As stated above, an angry man wishes evil to someone, in so far as this evil is a means of just vengeance. Now vengeance is wrought by the infliction of a punishment, and the nature of punishment consists in being contrary to the will, painful, and inflicted for some fault. Consequently, an angry man desires this, that the person whom he is hurting may feel it and may be in pain, and know that this has befallen him on account of the harm he has done the other. The hater, on the other hand, cares not for all of this, since he desires another's evil as such. It is not true, however, that an evil is worse through giving pain, because "injustice and imprudence, although evil, yet being voluntary, do not grieve those in whom they are," as the Philosopher observes (Rhet. ii, 4). Reply Obj. 3: That which proceeds from several causes is more settled when these causes are of one kind, but it may be that one cause prevails over many others. Now hatred ensues from a more lasting cause than anger does, because anger arises from an emotion of the soul due to the wrong inflicted, whereas hatred ensues from a disposition in a man, by reason of which he considers that which he hates to be contrary and hurtful to him. Consequently, as a passion is more transitory than disposition or habit, so anger is less lasting than hatred, although hatred itself is a passion ensuing from this disposition. Hence the Philosopher says (Rhet. ii, 4) that hatred is more incurable than anger. Seventh article. Whether anger is only towards those to whom one has an obligation of justice? Objection 1: It would seem that anger is not only towards those to whom one has an obligation of justice. For there is no justice between man and irrational beings. And yet sometimes one is angry with irrational beings. Thus, out of anger, a writer throws away his pen, or a rider strikes his horse. Therefore anger is not only towards those to whom one has an obligation of justice. Obj. 2: Further, there is no justice towards oneself, nor is there justice towards one's own. Ethic. v, 6. But sometimes a man is angry with himself, for instance, a penitent on account of his sin. Hence it is written in Ps. 4:5, "Be ye angry and sin not." Therefore anger is not only towards those with whom one has a relation of justice. Obj. 3: Further, justice and injustice can be of one man towards an entire class or a whole community, for instance, when the state injures an individual. But anger is not towards a class, but only towards an individual, as the Philosopher states (Rhet. ii, 4). Therefore, properly speaking, anger is not towards those with whom one is in relation of justice or injustice. The contrary, however, may be gathered from the Philosopher (Rhet. ii, 2, 3). I answer that, as stated above (A. 6), anger desires evil as being a means of just vengeance. Consequently, anger is towards those to whom we are just or unjust, since vengeance is an act of justice, and wrongdoing is an act of injustice. Therefore both on the part of the cause, viz. the harm done by another, and on the part of the vengeance sought by the angry man, it is evident that anger concerns those to whom one is just or unjust. Reply Obj. 1: As stated above (A. 4, ad 2), anger, though it follows an act of reason, can nevertheless be in dumb animals that are devoid of reason, in so far as through their natural instinct they are moved by their imagination to something like rational action. Since then in man there is both reason and imagination, the movement of anger can be aroused in man in two ways. First, when only his imagination denounces the injury, and in this way man is aroused to a movement of anger even against irrational and inanimate beings, which movement is like that which occurs in animals against anything that injures them. Secondly, by the reason denouncing the injury, and thus, according to the Philosopher (Rhet. ii, 3), "It is impossible to be angry with insensible things, or with the dead," because they feel no pain, which is, above all, what the angry man seeks in those with whom he is angry, and because there is no question of vengeance on them, since they can do us no harm. Reply Obj. 2: As the Philosopher says (Ethic. v, 11), "metaphorically speaking, there is a certain justice and injustice between a man and himself," in so far as the reason rules the irascible and concupiscible parts of the soul. And in this sense a man is said to be avenged on himself, and consequently to be angry with himself. But properly, and in accordance with the nature of things, a man is never angry with himself. Reply Obj. 3: The Philosopher (Rhet. ii, 4) assigns as one difference between hatred and anger, that "hatred may be felt towards a class, as when we hate the entire class of thieves; whereas anger is directed only towards an individual." The reason is that hatred arises from our considering a quality as disagreeing with our disposition, and this may refer to a thing in general or in particular. Anger, on the other hand, ensues from someone having injured us by his action. Now all actions are the deeds of individuals, and consequently anger is always pointed at an individual. When the whole state hurts us, the whole state is reckoned as one individual. Cf. Q. 29, A. 6. _______________________ EIGHTH ARTICLE [I II, Q. 100, Art. 8] Whether the Species of Anger Are Suitably Assigned? Objection 1: It would seem that Damascene (De Fide Orth. ii, 16) unsuitably assigns three species of anger: wrath, ill will, and rancor. For no genus derives its specific differences from accidents. But these three are diversified in respect of an accident, because "the beginning of the movement of anger is called wrath (cholos); if anger continue, it is called ill will (menis); while rancor (kotos) is anger waiting for an opportunity of vengeance." Therefore these are not different species of anger. Obj. 2: Further, Cicero says in the Tusculan Disputations iv, 9 that "escandentia" (irascibility) is what the Greeks call thymosis, and is a kind of anger that arises and subsides intermittently; while according to Damascene thymosis is the same as kotos (rancor). Therefore kotos does not bide its time for taking vengeance, but in course of time spends itself. Obj. 3: Further, Gregory (Moral. xxi, 4) gives 3 degrees of anger, namely, "anger without utterance, anger with utterance, and anger with perfection of speech," corresponding to the 3 degrees mentioned by Our Lord (Matt. 5:22): "Whosoever is angry with his brother," thus implying anger without utterance; and then, "whoever shall say to his brother Raca," implying anger with utterance yet without full expression; and lastly, "whoever shall say thou fool," where we have perfection of speech. Therefore Damascene's division is imperfect, since it takes no account of utterance. On the contrary stands the authority of Damascene (De Fide Orth. ii, 16) and Gregory of Nyssa (De Nat. Hom. xxi). I answer that, the species of anger given by Damascene and Gregory of Nyssa are taken from those things which give increase to anger. This happens in three ways. First, from facility of the movement itself, and he calls this kind of anger cholos, bile, because it is quickly aroused. Secondly, on the part of the grief that causes anger, and which dwells some time in the memory. This belongs to menis, ill will, which is derived from menein, to dwell. Thirdly, on the part of that which the angry man seeks, notably vengeance, and this pertains to kotos, rancor, which never rests until it is avenged. Cf. Eph. 4:31, "Let all bitterness and anger and indignation be put away from you." Hence the Philosopher (Ethic. iv, 5) calls some angry persons acrokoloi, choleric, because they are easily angered. Some he calls pikroi, bitter, because they retain their anger for a long time. And some he calls kalapoi, ill-tempered, because they never rest until they have retaliated. Cf. Secundae, question 158, A. 5. Reply Obj. 1: All those things which give anger some kind of perfection are not altogether accidental to anger, and consequently nothing prevents them from causing a certain specific difference thereof. Reply Obj. 2: Irascibility, which Cicero mentions, seems to pertain to the first species of anger, which consists in a certain quickness of temper, rather than to rancor, furor. And there is no reason why the Greek thymosis, which is denoted by the Latin furor, should not signify both quickness to anger and firmness of purpose in being avenged. Reply Obj. 3: These degrees are distinguished according to various effects of anger, and not according to degrees of perfection in the very movement of anger. End of question 46. Read by Michael Shane Craig Lambert, LC. Question 47 of Summa Theologica Prima Secundae, Treatise on the Passions. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Summa Theologica Prima Secundae, Treatise on the Passions, by St. Thomas Aquinas, translated by the Fathers of the English Dominican Province. Question 47. Of the cause that provokes anger, and of the remedies of anger, in 4 articles. Translator's note: there is no further mention of these remedies in the text, except in Article 4. We must now consider the cause that provokes anger, and its remedies. Under this head there are 4 points of inquiry. First, whether the motive of anger is always something done against the one who is angry. Second, whether slight or contempt is the sole motive of anger. Third, of the cause of anger on the part of the angry person. Fourth, of the cause of anger on the part of the person with whom one is angry. First article: whether the motive of anger is always something done against the one who is angry. Objection 1: It would seem that the motive of anger is not always something done against the one who is angry. Because man, by sinning, can do nothing against God, since it is written (Job 35:6): "If thy iniquities be multiplied, what shalt thou do against him?" And yet God is spoken of as being angry with man on account of sin, according to Psalm 105:40: "The Lord was exceedingly angry with his people." Therefore it is not always on account of something done against him that a man is angry. Obj. 2: Further, anger is a desire for vengeance. But one may desire vengeance for things done against others. Therefore we are not always angry on account of something done against us. Obj. 3: Further, as the Philosopher says (Rhet. ii, 2), man is angry especially with those "who despise what he takes a great interest in. Thus men who study philosophy are angry with those who despise philosophy," and so forth. But contempt of philosophy does not harm the philosopher. Therefore it is not always a harm done to us that makes us angry. Obj. 4: Further, he that holds his tongue when another insults him, provokes him to greater anger, as Chrysostom observes in his Homily 22 on the letter to the Romans. But by holding his tongue he does the other no harm. Therefore a man is not always provoked to anger by something done against him. On the contrary, the Philosopher says (Rhet. ii, 4) that "anger is always due to something done to oneself, whereas hatred may arise without anything being done to us, for we hate a man simply because we think him such." I answer that, as stated above (Q. 46, A. 6), anger is the desire to hurt another for the purpose of just vengeance. Now unless some injury has been done, there is no question of vengeance, nor does any injury provoke one to vengeance, but only that which is done to the person who seeks vengeance. For just as everything naturally seeks its own good, so does it naturally repel its own evil. But injury done by anyone does not affect a man unless in some way it be something done against him. Consequently the motive of a man's anger is always something done against him. Reply Obj. 1: We speak of anger in God not as of a passion of the soul, but as of judgment of justice, inasmuch as He wills to take vengeance on sin. Because the sinner, by sinning, cannot do God any actual harm, but so far as he himself is concerned, he acts against God in two ways. First, in so far as he despises God in His commandments. Secondly, in so far as he harms himself or another, which injury redounds to God, inasmuch as the person injured is an object of God's providence and protection. Reply Obj. 2: If we are angry with those who harm others, and seek to be avenged on them, it is because those who are injured belong in some way to us, either by some kinship or friendship, or at least because of the nature we have in common. Reply Obj. 3: When we take a very great interest in a thing, we look upon it as our own good, so that if anyone despise it, it seems as though we ourselves were despised and injured. Reply Obj. 4: Silence provokes the insulter to anger when he thinks it is due to contempt, as though his anger were slighted, and a slight is an action. Second article, whether the sole motive of anger is slight or contempt? Objection 1: It would seem that slight or contempt is not the sole motive of anger. For Damascene says (De Fide Orth. ii, 16) that we are angry "when we suffer or think that we are suffering an injury." But one may suffer an injury without being despised or slighted. Therefore a slight is not the only motive of anger. Obj. 2: Further, desire for honor and grief for a slight belong to the same object. But dumb animals do not desire honor. Therefore they are not grieved by being slighted. And yet "they are roused to anger when wounded," as the Philosopher says (Ethic. iii, 8). Therefore a slight is not the sole motive of anger. Obj. 3: Further, the Philosopher (Rhet. ii, 2) gives many other causes of anger, for instance, "being forgotten by others, that others should rejoice in our misfortunes, that they should make known our evils, being hindered from doing as we like." Therefore being slighted is not the only motive for being angry. On the contrary, The Philosopher says (Rhet. ii, 2) that "anger is a desire with sorrow, for vengeance, on account of a seeming slight done unbecomingly." I answer that, All the causes of anger are reduced to slight. For slight is of three kinds, as stated in Rhet. ii, 2, viz. contempt, despiteful treatment, i.e. hindering one from doing one's will, and insolence. And all motives of anger are reduced to these three. Two reasons may be assigned for this. First, because anger seeks another's hurt, as being a means of just vengeance. Wherefore it seeks vengeance in so far as it seems just. Now just vengeance is taken only for that which is done unjustly. Hence that which provokes anger is always something considered in the light of an injustice. Wherefore the Philosopher says (Rhet. ii, 3) that "men are not angry if they think they have wronged someone and are suffering justly on that account, because there is no anger at what is just." Now injury is done to another in three ways, namely through ignorance, through passion, and through choice. Then most of all a man does an injustice when he does an injury from choice, on purpose, or from deliberate malice, as stated in Ethic. v, 8. Wherefore we are most of all angry with those who, in our opinion, have hurt us on purpose. For if we think that someone has done us an injury through ignorance or through passion, either we are not angry with them at all, or very much less, since to do anything through ignorance or through passion takes away from the notion of injury, and to a certain extent calls for mercy and forgiveness. Those, on the other hand, who do an injury on purpose, seem to sin from contempt, wherefore we are angry with them most of all. Hence the Philosopher says (Rhet. ii, 3) that "we are either not angry at all, or not very angry with those who have acted through anger, because they do not seem to have acted slightingly." The second reason is because a slight is opposed to a man's excellence, because "men think little of things that are not worth much ado" (Rhet. ii, 2). Now we seek for some kind of excellence from all our goods. Consequently whatever injury is inflicted on us, in so far as it is derogatory to our excellence, seems to savor of a slight. Reply Obj. 1: Any other cause besides contempt, through which a man suffers an injury, takes away from the notion of injury. Contempt or slight alone adds to the motive of anger, and consequently is of itself the cause of anger. Reply Obj. 2: Although a dumb animal does not seek honor as such, yet it naturally seeks a certain superiority, and is angry with anything derogatory thereto. Reply Obj. 3: Each of those causes amounts to some kind of slight. Thus forgetfulness is a clear sign of slight esteem, for the more we think of a thing the more it is fixed in our memory. Again, if a man does not hesitate by his remarks to give pain to another, this seems to show that he thinks little of him. And those too who show signs of hilarity when another is in misfortune seem to care little about his good or evil. Again, he that hinders another from carrying out his will, without deriving thereby any profit to himself, seems not to care much for his friendship. Consequently, all those things, in so far as they are signs of contempt, provoke anger. Third article. Whether a man's excellence is the cause of his being angry? Objection 1: It would seem that a man's excellence is not the cause of his being more easily angry. For the Philosopher says (Rhet. ii, 2) that "some are angry especially when they are grieved, for instance the sick, the poor, and those who are disappointed." But these things seem to pertain to defect. Therefore defect rather than excellence makes one prone to anger. Obj. 2: Further, the Philosopher says (Rhet. ii, 2) that "some are very much inclined to be angry when they are despised for failing or weakness, of the existence of which there are grounds for suspicion. But if they think they excel in those points, they do not trouble." But a suspicion of this kind is due to some defect. Therefore defect rather than excellence is a cause of a man being angry. Obj. 3: Further, whatever savors of excellence makes a man agreeable and hopeful. But the Philosopher says (Rhet. ii, 3) that "men are not angry when they play, make jokes, or take part in a feast, nor when they are prosperous or successful, nor in moderate pleasures and well-founded hope." Therefore excellence is not a cause of anger. On the contrary, The Philosopher says (Rhet. ii, 9) that excellence makes men prone to anger. I answer that, The cause of anger, in the man who is angry, may be taken in two ways. First, in respect of the motive of anger, and thus excellence is the cause of a man being easily angered. Because the motive of anger is an unjust slight, as stated above (A. 2). Now it is evident that the more excellent a man is, the more unjust is a slight offered him in the matter in which he excels. Consequently, those who excel in any matter are most of all angry if they be slighted in that matter, for instance, a wealthy man in his riches, or an orator in his eloquence, and so forth. Secondly, the cause of anger, in the man who is angry, may be considered on the part of the disposition produced in him by the motive aforesaid. Now it is evident that nothing moves a man to anger except a hurt that grieves him. while whatever savors of defect is above all a cause of grief. Since men who suffer from some defect are more easily hurt, and this is why men who are weak or subject to some other defect are more easily angered, since they are more easily grieved. This suffices for the reply to the first objection. Reply to objection 2. If a man be despised in a matter in which he evidently excels greatly, he does not consider himself the loser thereby, and therefore is not grieved, and in this respect he is less angered. But in another respect, in so far as he is more undeservedly despised, he has more reason for being angry, unless perhaps he thinks that he is envied or insulted not through contempt, but through ignorance or some other like cause. Reply to obj. 3. All these things hinder anger in so far as they hinder sorrow, but in another respect they are naturally apt to provoke anger, because they make it more unseemly to insult anyone. Fourth article. Whether a person's defect is a reason for being more easily angry with him? Objection 1. It would seem that a person's defect is not a reason for being more easily angry with him. For the Philosopher says in Rhetoric ii, 3 that "we are not angry with those who confess and repent and humble themselves. On the contrary, we are gentle with them. Wherefore dogs bite not those who sit down." But these things savor of littleness and defect. Therefore littleness of a person is a reason for being less angry with him. Obj. 2. Further, there is no greater defect than death. But anger ceases at the sight of death. Therefore defect of a person does not provoke anger against him. Obj. 3. Further, no one thinks little of a man through his being friendly towards him. But we are more angry with friends if they offend us or refuse to help us. Hence it is written in Psalm 54:13, "If my enemy had reviled me, I would verily have borne with it." Therefore a person's defect is not a reason for being more easily angry with him. On the contrary, the Philosopher says in Rhetoric ii, 2 that "the rich man is angry with the poor man, if the latter despise him; and in like manner the prince is angry with his subject." I answer that, as stated above (AA. 2 and 3), unmerited contempt more than anything else is a provocative of anger. Consequently deficiency or littleness in the person with whom we are angry tends to increase our anger, in so far as it adds to the unmeritedness of being despised. For just as the higher a man's position is, the more undeservedly he is despised, so the lower it is, the less reason he has for despising. Thus a nobleman is angry if he be insulted by a peasant, a wise man if by a fool, a master if by a servant. If, however, the littleness or deficiency lessens the unmerited contempt, then it does not increase but lessens anger. In this way those who repent of their ill deeds, and confess that they have done wrong, who humble themselves and ask pardon, mitigate anger, according to Proverbs 15:1, "A mild answer breaketh wrath," because, to wit, they seem not to despise but rather to think much of those before whom they humble themselves. This suffices for the reply to the first objection. Reply to obj. 2. There are two reasons why anger ceases at the sight of death. One is because the dead are incapable of sorrow and sensation, and this is chiefly what the angry seek in those with whom they are angered. Another reason is because the dead seem to have attained to the limit of evils. Hence anger ceases in regard to all who are grievously hurt, in so far as this hurt surpasses the measure of just retaliation. Reply Obj. 3: To be despised by one's friends seems also a greater indignity. Consequently, if they despise us by hurting or by failing to help, we are angry with them for the same reason for which we are angry with those who are beneath us. End of question 47. Read by Michael Shane Craig Lambert, LC. Question 48 of Summa Theologica Prima Secundae, Treatise on the Passions. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Summa Theologica Prima Secundae, Treatise on the Passions, by St. Thomas Aquinas, translated by the Fathers of the English Dominican Province. Question 48 of the effects of anger, in 4 articles. We must now consider the effects of anger, under which head there are 4 points of inquiry. First, whether anger causes pleasure. Second, whether above all it causes heat in the heart. Third, whether above all it hinders the use of reason. Fourth, whether it causes taciturnity. First article, whether anger causes pleasure. Objection 1. It would seem that anger does not cause pleasure. Because sorrow excludes pleasure. But anger is never without sorrow, since, as stated in Ethic. 7:6, everyone that acts from anger acts with pain. Therefore anger does not cause pleasure. Objection 2. Further, the Philosopher says in Ethic. 4:5 that vengeance makes anger to cease because it substitutes pleasure for pain. Whence we may gather that the angry man derives pleasure from vengeance, and that vengeance quells his anger. Therefore, on the advent of pleasure, anger departs, and consequently anger is not an effect united with pleasure. Obj. 3. Further, no effect hinders its cause, since it is conformed to its cause. But pleasure hinders anger, as stated in Rhetoric. 2:3. Therefore pleasure is not an effect of anger. On the contrary, the Philosopher in Ethic. 4:5 quotes the saying that anger is "sweet to the soul as honey to the taste," quoting from the Iliad, Book 18, paragraph 109 in the Pope translation. I answer that, as the Philosopher says in Ethic. 7:14, pleasures, chiefly sensible and bodily pleasures, are remedies against sorrow, and therefore the greater the sorrow or anxiety, the more sensible are we to the pleasure which heals it, as is evident in the case of thirst, which increases the pleasure of drink. Now it is clear from what has been said in question 47, articles 1 and 3, that the movement of anger arises from a wrong done that causes sorrow, for which sorrow vengeance is sought as a remedy. Consequently, as soon as vengeance is present, pleasure ensues, and so much the greater according as the sorrow was greater. Therefore, if vengeance be really present, perfect pleasure ensues, entirely excluding sorrow, so that the movement of anger ceases. But before vengeance is really present, it becomes present to the angry man in two ways. In one way, by hope, because none is angry except he hopes for vengeance, as stated above (Q. 46, A. 1). In another way, by thinking of it continually, for to everyone that desires a thing it is pleasant to dwell on the thought of what he desires. Wherefore the imaginings of dreams are pleasant. Accordingly, an angry man takes pleasure in thinking about vengeance. This pleasure, however, is not perfect, so as to banish sorrow and consequently anger. Reply Obj. 1: The angry man does not grieve and rejoice at the same thing. He grieves for the wrong done, while he takes pleasure in the thought and hope of vengeance. Consequently, sorrow is to anger as its beginning, while pleasure is the effect or terminus of anger. Reply Obj. 2: This argument holds in regard to pleasure caused by the real presence of vengeance, which banishes anger altogether. Reply Obj. 3: Pleasure that precedes hinders sorrow from ensuing, and consequently is a hindrance to anger. But pleasure felt in taking vengeance follows from anger. _______________________ SECOND ARTICLE [I II, Q. 100, Art. 2] Whether Anger Above All Causes Fervor in the Heart? Objection 1: It would seem that heat is not above all the effect of anger. For fervor, as stated above (Q. 28, A. 5; and Q. 37, A. 2), belongs to love. But love, as above stated, is the beginning and cause of all the passions. Since then the cause is more powerful than its effect, it seems that anger is not the chief cause of fervor. Obj. 2: Further, those things which, of themselves, arouse fervor, increase as time goes on. Thus love grows stronger the longer it lasts. But in course of time anger grows weaker: for the Philosopher says (Rhet. ii, 3) that "time puts an end to anger." Therefore fervor is not the proper effect of anger. Obj. 3: Further, fervor added to fervor produces greater fervor. But "the addition of a greater anger banishes already existing anger," as the Philosopher says (Rhet. ii, 3). Therefore anger does not cause fervor. On the contrary, Damascene says (De Fide Orth. ii, 16) that "anger is fervor of the blood around the heart, resulting from an exhalation of the bile." I answer that, as stated above (Q. 44, A. 1), the bodily transmutation that occurs in the passions of the soul is proportionate to the movement of the appetite. Now it is evident that every appetite, even the natural appetite, tends with greater force to repel that which is contrary to it, if it be present. Hence when we see that hot water freezes harder, as though the cold acted with greater force on the hot object. Since then the appetitive movement of anger is caused by some injury inflicted, as by a contrary that is present, it follows that the appetite tends with great force to repel the injury by the desire of vengeance: and hence ensues great vehemence and impetuosity in the movement of anger. And because the movement of anger is not one of recoil, which corresponds to the action of cold, but one of prosecution, which corresponds to the action of heat, the result is that the movement of anger produces fervor of the blood and vital spirits around the heart, which is the instrument of the soul's passions. And hence it is that, on account of the heart being so disturbed by anger, those chiefly who are angry betray signs thereof in their outer members. For, as Gregory says (Moral. v, 30), "the heart that is inflamed with the stings of its own anger beats quick, the body trembles, the tongue stammers, the countenance takes fire, the eyes grow fierce, they that are well known are not recognized. With the mouth indeed he shapes a sound, but the understanding knows not what it says." Reply Obj. 1: Love itself is not felt so keenly as in the absence of the beloved, as Augustine observes (De Trin. x, 12). Consequently, when a man suffers from a hurt done to the excellence that he loves, he feels his love thereof the more: the result being that his heart is moved with greater heat to remove the hindrance to the object of his love, so that anger increases the fervor of love and makes it to be felt more. Nevertheless, the fervor arising from heat differs according as it is to be referred to love or to anger. Because the fervor of love has a certain sweetness and gentleness, for it tends to the good that one loves: whence it is likened to the warmth of the air and of the blood. For this reason sanguine temperaments are more inclined to love, and hence the saying that "love springs from the liver," because of the blood being formed there. On the other hand, the fervor of anger has a certain bitterness with a tendency to destroy, for it seeks to be avenged on the contrary evil: whence it is likened to the heat of fire and of the bile, and for this reason Damascene says (De Fide Orth. ii, 16) that it "results from an exhalation of the bile, whence it takes its name chole." Reply Obj. 2: Time, of necessity, weakens all those things, the causes of which are impaired by time. Now it is evident that memory is weakened by time, for things which happened long ago easily slip from our memory. But anger is caused by the memory of a wrong done. Consequently the cause of anger is impaired little by little as time goes on, until at length it vanishes altogether. Moreover, a wrong seems greater when it is first felt, and our estimate thereof is gradually lessened the further the sense of present wrong recedes into the past. The same applies to love, so long as the cause of love is in the memory alone. Wherefore the Philosopher says (Ethic. viii, 5) that "if a friend's absence lasts long, it seems to make men forget their friendship." But in the presence of a friend, the cause of friendship is continually being multiplied by time, wherefore the friendship increases: and the same would apply to anger, were its cause continually multiplied. Nevertheless, the very fact that anger soon spends itself proves the strength of its fervor: for as a great fire is soon spent, having burnt up all the fuel, so too anger, by reason of its vehemence, soon dies away. Reply Obj. 3: Every power that is divided in itself is weakened. Consequently, if a man being already angry with one becomes angry with another, by this very fact his anger with the former is weakened. Especially is this so if his anger in the second case be greater: because the wrong done which aroused his former anger will, in comparison with the second wrong, which is reckoned greater, seem to be of little or no account. Third article: Whether anger above all hinders the use of reason? Objection 1: It would seem that anger does not hinder the use of reason. Because that which presupposes an act of reason does not seem to hinder the use of reason. But "anger listens to reason," as stated in Ethic. vii, 6. Therefore anger does not hinder reason. Obj. 2: Further, the more reason is hindered, the less does a man show his thoughts. But the Philosopher says (Ethic. vii, 6) that "an angry man is not cunning but is open." Therefore anger does not seem to hinder the use of reason, as desire does. For desire is cunning, as he also states (Ethic. vii, 6). Obj. 3: Further, the judgment of reason becomes more evident by juxtaposition of the contrary, because contraries stand out more clearly when placed beside one another. But this also increases anger: for the Philosopher says (Rhet. ii, 2) that "men are more angry if they receive unwonted treatment; for instance, honorable men if they be dishonored," and so forth. Therefore the same cause increases anger, and facilitates the judgment of reason. Therefore anger does not hinder the judgment of reason. On the contrary, Gregory says (Moral. v, 30) that "anger withdraws the light of understanding, while by agitating it troubles the mind." I answer that, although the mind or reason makes no use of a bodily organ in its proper act, yet since it needs certain sensitive powers for the execution of its act, the acts of which powers are hindered when the body is disturbed, it follows of necessity that any disturbance in the body hinders even the judgment of reason, as is clear in the case of drunkenness or sleep. Now it has been stated (A. 2) that anger, above all, causes a bodily disturbance in the region of the heart, so much as to affect even the outward members. Consequently, of all the passions, anger is the most manifest obstacle to the judgment of reason, according to Ps. 30:10: "My eye is troubled with wrath." Reply Obj. 1: The beginning of anger is in the reason, as regards the appetitive movement, which is the formal element of anger. But the passion of anger forestalls the perfect judgment of reason, as though it listened but imperfectly to reason, on account of the commotion of the heat urging it to instant action, which commotion is the material element of anger. In this respect it hinders the judgment of reason. Reply Obj. 2: An angry man is said to be open, not because it is clear to him what he ought to do, but because he acts openly, without thought of hiding himself. This is due partly to the reason being hindered, so as not to discern what should be hidden and what done openly, nor to devise the means of hiding, and partly to the dilatation of the heart which pertains to magnanimity, which is an effect of anger. Wherefore the Philosopher says of the magnanimous man (Ethic. iv, 3) that "he is open in his hatreds and his friendships, and speaks and acts openly." Desire, on the other hand, is said to lie low and to be cunning, because in many cases the pleasurable things that are desired savor of shame and voluptuousness, wherein man wishes not to be seen. But in those things that savor of manliness and excellence, such as matters of vengeance, man seeks to be in the open. Reply Obj. 3: As stated above in the first reply, the movement of anger begins in the reason, wherefore the juxtaposition of one contrary with another facilitates the judgment of reason, on the same grounds as it increases anger. For when a man who is possessed of honor or wealth suffers a loss therein, the loss seems all the greater, both on account of the contrast, and because it was unforeseen. Consequently it causes greater grief: just as a great good, through being received unexpectedly, causes greater delight. And in proportion to the increase of the grief that precedes, anger is increased also. Fourth article. Whether anger above all causes taciturnity? Objection 1. It would seem that anger does not cause taciturnity. Because taciturnity is opposed to speech. But increase in anger conduces to speech, as is evident from the degrees of anger laid down by our Lord in Matthew 5:22, where He says, "Whosoever is angry with his brother," and "Whosoever shall say to his brother, Raca," and "Whoever shall say to his brother, Thou fool." Therefore anger does not cause taciturnity. Obj. 2: Further, through failing to obey reason, man sometimes breaks out into unbecoming words. Hence it is written in Proverbs 25:28, "As a city that lieth open, and is not compassed with walls, so is a man that cannot refrain his own spirit in speaking." But anger, above all, hinders the judgment of reason, as stated above (A. 3). Consequently, above all, it makes one break out into unbecoming words. Therefore it does not cause taciturnity. Obj. 3: Further, it is written (Matthew 12:34): "Out of the abundance of the heart the mouth speaketh." But anger, above all, causes a disturbance in the heart, as stated above (A. 2). Therefore, above all, it conduces to speech. Therefore it does not cause taciturnity. On the contrary, Gregory says (Moral. v:30) that "when anger does not vent itself outwardly by the lips, inwardly it burns the more fiercely." I answer that, as stated above (A. 3), as well as (Q. 46, A. 4), anger both follows an act of reason and hinders the reason, and in both respects it may cause taciturnity. On the part of the reason, when the judgment of the reason prevails so far that although it does not curb the appetite in its inordinate desire for vengeance, yet it curbs the tongue from unbridled speech. Wherefore Gregory says (Moral. v:30): "Sometimes, when the mind is disturbed, anger, as if in judgment, commands silence." On the part of the impediment to reason, because, as stated above (A. 2), the disturbance of anger reaches to the outward members, and chiefly to those members which reflect more distinctly the emotions of the heart, such as the eyes, face, and tongue. Wherefore, as observed above (A. 2), "the tongue stammers, the countenance takes fire, the eyes grow fierce." Consequently anger may cause such a disturbance that the tongue is altogether deprived of speech, and taciturnity is the result. Reply Obj. 1: Anger sometimes goes so far as to hinder the reason from curbing the tongue, but sometimes it goes yet farther, so as to paralyze the tongue and other outward members. And this suffices for the reply to the second objection. Reply Obj. 3: The disturbance of the heart may sometimes superabound to the extent that the movements of the outward members are hindered by the inordinate movement of the heart. Thence ensue taciturnity and immobility of the outward members, and sometimes even death. If, however, the disturbance be not so great, then "out of the abundance of the heart," thus disturbed, the mouth proceeds to speak. End of question 48. Read by Michael Shane Craig Lambert, L.C. End of Treatise on the Passions.